250 years ago, there's a philosopher named Joseph Priestley who had the idea that more elaborate communications tools actually created less communication, led to less communication. Now, it's an interesting idea, and it's a little bit counterintuitive, especially in an age where we're seeing 4 billion tweets per month, as well as 30 billion Facebook posts, as well as 6 billion hours of YouTube video watched every month. Now, for me, I'm an optimist, and I work in the area of politics, and I study politics, and I work in the area of international relations. And so for me, I had extremely high hopes for what social media could do for interactive political dialogue, for citizens and politicians to communicate with one another at new levels. Now, I got a bit disappointed after a few years, realizing that in a lot of ways, it's failed to meet my expectations. Now, what we've seen is that there's a 21st century approach that we would like to do, but there's it being implemented in 20th century ways. There's a 21st century tools that are being kind of used in a 21st century top-down, centralized, one-way methods. Now, I became a little bit more hopeful in terms of the power of social media to spur social change and to improve the ability to spur political dialogue and create interaction between citizens and politicians. On August 29th, 2012, when Barack Obama, who was on the campaign trail, made a stop in Charlottesville, Virginia. He was leading a pretty good campaign. It was a hot day, and he stopped and he made a short speech at a campus, and he shook a few hands, and went around back into a pavilion where he sat down in front of a laptop with his staff around him. Now, he'd already demonstrated that he knew his way around the internet, and he could already help use social media to deliver his message and gather people around him. That was proven. However, the lead member of his digital media team wanted to try something a bit different. He wanted to take a little bit more bold step into the online arena and try something called a Reddit Ask Me Anything. Now, Reddit is a niche online community where users upvote and downvote information for other users. And an Ask Me Anything is essentially an online chat session where comments and content are upvoted to a user of interest. He verified his account after receiving instructions. He verified his account and posted this picture. After 5 minutes, there was 37 questions and comments that were taken to him. And he kind of broke the blogosphere with news of this Ask Me Anything. After 10 minutes, he received 241 more comments, and it hit mainstream news outlets like CBS and the Washington Post. After 30 minutes, there are 5,000 questions and comments which were posted and upvoted to him. And even though Reddit, which is now the 56th largest website in the world, had purchased extra servers to handle the capacity and the extra activity that they expected, the servers began to stress, and the site began to slow a little bit. After an hour, there was more than 10,000 questions and comments posted with nearly 100,000 page views per minute. At the end of the day, there were 20,000 questions and comments and more than 3 million page views. Now, it was interesting in that he answered questions ranging from what was the recipe for the White House beer to what can you do for me as a recent college graduate who's looking to get a job, buy a home, and raise a family. He was relaxed, and he was empathetic, and he was personal, and he found a way to connect, however, in a way that was direct. It was also efficient and effective. It was efficient in that he was able to reach a mass audience within a 30-minute span. It was effective in that in doing so, and in allowing the community conversation to take place, he was able to touch the emotional strings, touch people at an emotional level and also at an intellectual level to make them feel like they had a stake and like they had a part of the discussion going on, as if they were almost sitting across from the table and he was looking at them eye to eye. My day job, as was mentioned, is to carry out political speeches and to write political speeches. I have worked with presidents over the past 5 years. I've worked with prime ministers. I've worked with ambassadors and director generals. I've worked at the highest levels of the United Nations and the European Union. I've worked on campaigns in the southern United States, and I've worked on transparency initiatives in South America. I've worked for an East Asian government helping to communicate nuclear disarmament policy, and I've worked for a Western European government helping to negotiate sensitive labor issues with the international level. Now, I became frustrated, however, in that I felt like when I was in the office, I existed in a glass box, and that whenever I left, whatever I did and whoever I saw afterwards, there stood no chance for them to even take a Post-it note and put it on the desk that put it on the desk of the people that I was working with every day. So I began to think. How Kenny, my high school baseball coach, or Maritza, my Chilean host mother, what chance would they have to actually have dialogue at the highest levels? Now, sure, absolutely. They could send a letter or send an email to one of the politicians, maybe their governor, and they could receive what we all probably would know as a pre-written, pretty formulaic response. They could also send a tweet or post a comment into the abyss of the thousands that these people receive every day. They could also stand on the side of a street and hold a sign and maybe get a nod or a wave from an official who's leaving after work. But again, this troubled me because I started to wonder, well, how is this going to do anything? How can we bring people together at the table? It was a question of efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency in that the people that I was working with needed a way to manage and collect and create coherence across all the information that they were receiving. It's too much. It's too fast. It needed to be effective in that the people that I was working with needed to reach down and actually engage. People had come to have greater expectations for what social media could provide to them. This past year, there's been elections in Indonesia. And these elections provide a pretty interesting example of the limits of current social media tools and approaches to meet both the expectations of citizens and politicians. And it helped show, obviously, the capacities that are limiting and that are limited with which we have now. And so it was between two candidates. And as a small note, Indonesia is one of the social media capitals of the world. Residents in the capital city of Jakarta tweet more than any other city on earth. In this election, which ended up being a 95 million tweet, 200 post, Facebook post election, it was pretty hard to break through the noise. Now, two candidates. One was a young, fresh political newcomer who took a more decentralized approach. He recognized the need to have a social media strategy, and he recognized the need to be able to touch down, reach, and connect directly with people. Decentralized approach, he created 24 social media tribes of volunteers across the country. And it created a more tailored, responsive, creative method for going about and speaking with people through social media platforms. The other candidate was a former Army lieutenant general. He was an experienced businessman. And he also had a significant amount of experience in the area of politics. He took a somewhat more top-down, centralized approach in that he hired what was probably a legion of staff, 75 staff working around the clock in 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day, to make sure that messages that were sent to him via the social media accounts were responded to within 15 minutes. Now, one analyst noted that absolutely the more organic, decentralized approach allowed for that tailored messaging. But however, the problem was that being so spread out and so decentralized that he wasn't able to respond to the mass amounts of communication that was coming his way through social media. There was attacks coming, and there was all kinds of issues with being able to create a coherent message and deliver that to people. The more centralized approach had its advantages, however, and obviously you could deal with the volume pretty efficiently. You could just tell your staff to, hey, we're writing about this, let's do it. However, the 24-hour social media response factory had the impression of being just that, a factory. It lacked the ability, just like Obama was able to do it, lacked the ability to touch people at the intellectual and emotional levels and create and stir something deep within them and say, hey, I'm with you. Our story begins 2 years ago in the mountains of eastern Switzerland when I met a Mexican biofuels entrepreneur over a hamburger. And over the course of telling me about his business, he was also telling me about a little side project that he had in terms of that he had seen the need to connect with his politicians over the course of carrying out his biofuels business. Now, I got interested, naturally, because it's my line of work, and naturally, like any great idea, you start with lots of coffee and lots of napkins, scratching out notes on the back of napkins. And like any other great project, I took it back, and my first pitch was to my roommates. And it just so happens that being based in Geneva, Switzerland, that a lot of people there are interested in the same kind of stuff. And so very quickly we started to think through these ideas. It wasn't long before we were able to actually nail down the key objectives, the key problems, the key gaps, and the pains that people were feeling. Pain one, politicians were overwhelmed and just consumed by the massive volume of information through social media that was coming their way. They were unable to create coherence. They were unable to deliver a message to citizens. Problem two, citizens had no way to directly connect with politicians because the politicians were so overworked, and obviously the volumes were too much. And problem three, the massive complexity of political issues was so hard to break. There was no way to take the full spectrum of all of those 95 million, 200 million Facebook posts and tweets and put logical order to that if you're a candidate or if you're a sitting member of parliament. So we got to work. We created a team and we created a platform. The website centered on upvote, downvote, weighted system to where, as a citizen, you go to your politician's profile and you simply post a question. It's as easy as a click, 200 character minimum, and then you send it out to your friends, and your friends upvote that question to the politician. Functionality was fairly simple. The challenge came in, well, okay, how do we create an ecosystem on this platform? If you're looking at how to solve the chicken or the egg problem, what comes first? Well, you create a farm. And so what we did was we used our skills in the area of politics and international relations and our skills in terms of communication to go to these politicians, and we chose the European Union. Now, the European Union is, for anyone who knows much about it, is a pretty complex political system. It's a 28-country, 24-language supranational body with representing 500 million people and with a full range of political ideologies, parties, and groups. So we started knocking on doors. We contacted politicians and we met with them, and the pitch was pretty easy. The pains they were feeling were extremely real and extremely present in their daily work. We met with politicians from the full range of the political spectrum, from former ministers and high-level national parliamentarians and representatives, former academics, former businessmen, and we connected them to what we were doing. Problem two, however, was how do we put together a community of people, not necessarily who are attached to a political ideology or a political process, but how do we put people here who are committed to creating a framework for dialogue and then promoting that instead of necessarily some kind of political opinion. So we created, with the help of a lot of people, a network of GovFaces groups across 15 countries in the European Union, ranging from Hungary to Bulgaria to Spain to Italy to France, the United Kingdom. And we got these people, who soon became our friends, to promote, again, like I said, not necessarily an ideology, but a process and a framework. And then we saw some pretty interesting results. We saw Polish members of parliament communicating on Russian regional hegemony and the relationship between the EU and the Ukraine. We saw Belgian members of parliament communicating with Greek NGOs on issues of women's rights. We saw French members of parliament communicating with Czech journalists on issues of the EU's role in the Czech Republic. We saw Croatian members of parliament communicating with Palestinian graduate students regarding employment opportunity. We saw other French members of parliament communicating with students and student organizations on issues related to the EU's foreign policy in South America. The results were pretty impressive in that not only here was it someone who took a question to her, everyone there had a stake, regardless of race, religion, sex, social status. Everyone who had the energy to click up or down into that conversation then became an active part. Then we started to dream a little bit. We started to think, what would this be like? What would this do for NGOs in terms of placing them at the center as mobilizers and drivers of conversations, helping them to take their areas of expertise and put that on the desks of politicians? We started to brainstorm a little bit, and we said, what would it be if we could have journalists? How would this change the nature of a press conference? How could this change the nature of putting readers and viewers as active participants in the dialogue? that was being carried forward on their screens? What about businesses and lobby organizations and trade associations? How could this help them clarify positions both upward and downward regarding the implications of policy decisions? Finally, we wondered also, what would this do for Kenny, a delivery truck driver in the rural American South, or Maritza, a hairdresser at the base of the Andes in central Chile, and how could we help them be brought into the conversation? Finally, we began to imagine a little bit more, and we wondered, what would it be like to have a global political platform focused on constituency communication that 10 years from now, nobody could imagine living without? Thank you.